So this is John Reed, Diginomicon, joined by Josh Greenbaum and Geoff Scott. How you doing, guys?
Excellent. We do that in 4-part harmonies.
Live in person. So we are gathered at ASUG Tech Connect, and we actually have a live audience for the first time. Thank you all for being willing to experiment with this format. And we're going to be turning to them. So they're going to help dictate our agenda today. One very interesting thing, we just did a hand poll, and we asked enterprise architecture or AI as a topic, and enterprise architecture trounced AI. Why do you think that is?
I think personally, I have AI fatigue. I'm just tired of talking about it. I've been, like you and I were together at an event a couple weeks ago out in San Francisco, and just every single conversation started with AI. And I kind of overdosed on it when someone started talking about the future of your medical robot delivering drugs to you and taking care of your every need. And I thought, what century might you be in? And I can't connect to that as a reality right now. So in every place I've been over the last 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, it's all AI all the time. And I have to talk about something else.
I think also if you paid attention to the data that Marissa was showing us, it's not all AI all the time in the ASUG community. I think there was a healthy degree of not buying the full AI, everything all at once kind of story. So I'm not surprised.
There's also an interesting, and we said we weren't going to talk about AI, but here we went anyway. And then I'm going to say one more thing and then I'm going to move on. Gallup published a really interesting article about 2 weeks ago where they talked about just general wide population adoption of AI. And it was like almost 70% of the population is not thinking about AI, which says to me, are we maybe potentially just living in our own echo chamber? That this is a really hot tech topic and we're thinking about it from a enterprise tech and a tech perspective, but I think when you do those wide polls that look across a wide swath of the world, it's a very different thing. So I discount what they said a little bit, but I think there's some reality to the fact that this is an echo chamber.
Yes, I think also if you just look at the distribution of broadband in the country, it's pretty centralized as well. I'm not surprised. I think this is a topic that we can now move on from. Yes.
Yeah.
To you, John.
You don't get to move on from before I get to comment on it, guys. But yeah, I think AI actually is a bit of a cultural phenomenon. So I would object to those poll results. I mean, just look at the impact on higher education and the dilemmas that students and teachers are facing on how to handle this in school. But anyhow, that's a topic for another time. I think part of the AI thing is not AI fatigue, though I think that's real. And I just wrote about that. But I think it's having the right kind of AI conversation. And I think you started on that this morning, and I have some things I want to stir the pot on with this morning's conversation. But the audience voted for EA, so we're not going to do that right now. We're going to talk about EA. And I think one of the reasons that people voted for EA is actually because it's a very, very potent topic that really is coming to a head right now with all of the pending transformations that are going on in the SAP world. So in my view, part of the reason we got those hands is not just, oh, give me a break from AI. It's because enterprise architecture is actually a really big deal. And the skill set is challenging to wrap your head around. I mean, the sessions I attended yesterday were quite illuminating, but one of the things I left taken away from that was like, how many people on earth can say they have all of these skills? Oh, and by the way, Christian Klein did promise every RISE project an EA back in May. So there's some pressure on SAP too to deliver on this. So this is a really juicy topic. So how do you guys want to address it?
I was in Waldorf a couple weeks ago and I released a podcast with Thomas Saueressig on ASUG Talks. And I asked Thomas this question that you're describing about the role of the enterprise architect. One of the things that I see us doing as a community in these conversations is going to almost the tools right away. And I keep hearing us talk about, well, there's Signavio, there's LeanIX, there's WalkMe, there's Cloud ALM, right? And it's not a conversation about what is the skill set that a modern enterprise architect needs to have. It's here's all these tools. It's like, you coming to me and saying, hey, Geoff, I need you to build me a house. And I go hammer, hammer, screwdriver, hammer, hammer, screwdriver, nail. And you say, yeah, but how do I build the house? So I just keep giving you those things back. So I think we're giving out all these tools, but we're not necessarily telling the people how to use these tools, why they should be using these tools. And I don't think it's about the tools. I think the tools are the means to the end. It's really about what do we want these enterprise architects to accomplish? Are we giving them the right skills to accomplish that? Is the organizations that they are working for clear in what that role is? And even amongst the members of the ASUG board who are all CIOs. Some of them have dedicated architects, and some of them fractionalize it. And then I had a conversation with one CIO that says, "I don't have an enterprise architect. I have 4 people that do it part time." So how do I manage that as a CIO? And am I even being clear about what that job specification is and how we measure success?
Let's take a step back for just one sec. Putting aside how realistic it is for SAP to provide an enterprise architect to every RISE customer, we can get to that. Why do you think he mentioned that? Why was that such an important thing at ASUG annual conference / Sapphire last spring? Why?
I think from an SAP perspective, it's important because the complexity of the technology is bigger than ever. The notion of cloud, clean core, public cloud, SaaS are all very, very nuanced topics. And I think SAP feels, and I'm putting words in their mouth because I haven't asked this question directly, that if they want to be relevant and be a player in this is a way to do it. What I sometimes I'm not sure about is enterprise architecture the new pre-sales function? Is that how this is working? That
we did hear some cynical comments about that. This is essentially a way to get, a friendly incognito account rep on every project. I don't really think that's what that was about, but there's certainly an element of that customers are concerned about, I think. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to try to take a glass half full view. Don't be shocked. But, I think
it's not your role in this.
I know, but I'm going to try it. I'm trying to emphasize. I think one of the potential reasons that Thomas and Christian are pushing this is in part because of the recognition that they see a disconnect in the customer base between business and technology, between the justifications customers need for moving to S4 from the tech side and from the business side. And ideally, and I think we can agree, there's a consensus that somewhere in the myriad definitions of enterprise architect is a single unifying idea that this is a place where tech and business come together. And certainly from conversations, and we'll get to impressions of this Tech Connect conference, certainly conversations I've had several of with customers show that is still the number one reason customers that I talk to are not upgrading is because they can't make a business case. Full stop. So again, I'm being hopeful that behind this notion of enterprise architect, in every pod is a recognition that we need to do a better job of bringing the business and the tech side together. Anybody buying?
Yes, I buy that. I do have a question for the audience today. By show of hands, how many of you are enterprise architects? Interesting.
Almost half the audience.
And then my next question for you is, how many of you as enterprise architects believe that you have an absolute grip on everything that's happening in your enterprise and your enterprise technology portfolio?
Trick question.
Well, no one gets door prize.
Wow, there are no hands that rose. No one, but one's thinking about it and I think I'm going to walk into a trap.
We got a run.
So it's not even a convincing hand raise, maybe.
Well, it's kind of, so here's where I'm going. We're like, oh, I'm a rock star. That's a lot to ask.
As Josh and I reverse polls, magnetic polls in today's conversation, I take the role of cynic and he takes the role of optimist. It won't last, by the way.
No way.
It will not last. I worry that as SAP makes a statement that we're setting these individuals up to fail. And what do I mean by that? Is that I think it's, as evidenced in this room, you as enterprise architects don't feel like you have a handle on your own internal portfolio. And we know that understanding the SAP portfolio is a big, daunting task. So how does an enterprise architect working for SAP not only understand the SAP portfolio, but understand your portfolio and be able to give you reasonable recommendations? And then if it's one per customer, how many customers does this theoretical role support? And if we say, well, this theoretical role has to support in order to scale 50, 100, 200 customers, I think people's heads will explode because there's no way to keep all of that information in sync. So practically speaking, while I like the notion that there's going to be all these enterprise architects, I don't know enough to say, how do we measure success?
So let me give some good news, bad news from the conversations on EAs so far. And Josh and I, we did a session on this earlier and got some feedback, and we went to Paul Kachina's yesterday. So I think the bad news is that then you throw AI into the mix and data platforms into the mix, and to what extent the enterprise architects now need to be responsible and articulate about those conversations internally as well. And like you said, you're setting people up for kind of a very challenging agenda. And then the discussions yesterday were all about like, what is your biggest challenge? Well, proving your business value. So I think there's a whole lot of difficulty there. Yesterday, I went to an SAP session on kind of like how to think about enterprise architects going forward. And they were kind of testing some messaging that's not like totally official at this point, but it was a great session. And one of the core things that came out of it was this notion of stakeholder management. And like, to me, that really jumps out because I think a core aspect of enterprise architects going forward is, unfortunately, some of you might not like this, that soft skills aspect of things. It's the ability to, well, more than schmooze, but really articulate in business terms what your landscape is all about and helping them to understand the impact, right? Because you may be involved in a complex exercise of rationalizing system landscapes, and a business person looks at that and says, how is this furthering my agenda? How is this helping my growth? How is this helping my bottom line? And that's not a simple question to answer if you're not prepared for it. And so I think that's a really interesting way to think about sort of at the core of the new skill set is that ability to manage all the stakeholder groups. But it's a lot to work on. And I think that's why so many people are here, is to try to start figuring that out.
I think we've entered an arena where technology is accessible by everyone. And if you have a purchasing card or a credit card, you can go buy out whatever you want. So if I'm an enterprise architect and I cannot have any control over the governance of technology acquisition, and largely what I'm responsible for is trying to assemble a never-ending, avalanche of puzzle pieces, and I never get a chance to raise my hand and say, stop giving me puzzle pieces. I'm going to tell you which puzzle pieces you can and can't have. And I think for many enterprise architects, that is a very difficult conversation to have, because to your point, John, the business will just run over you and say, hey, well, thanks for that, but this is what I'm going to do anyway. And now figure out how to integrate it. And by the time you get to the integration conversation, this thing has already grown 15 legs, right? And it's got its own data stores, and you're trying to figure out how to bring it back together again. So if the enterprise architecture function, as supported by the CIO and the line of business leaders, does not have any ability to govern what's purchased, then all they're able to do is try to keep all their fingers in the dike and try to stop, chaos from occurring. And I don't know if that's a great place to be.
Well, and let me just add to that mix real quick before Josh, you jump in, is this whole thing around seamless integration. I was on an SAP website today reading all about seamless integration. Well, if that's true, great. But a lot of times seamless integration turns out to be more like a work in progress. And guess who gets held responsible for that internally?
So the enterprise architect takes all the blame. You've been very quiet.
I know. Well, you have so much interesting things to say.
You've never said that to me before.
I haven't seen you in a long time. I don't want to ruin it. I think that, first of all, we have to, I think, really set some boundaries about which part of the enterprise architect job we're talking about, because I think one of the immediate functions of an enterprise architect in this audience, I think, or in this conference, is how do I help my company move to S/4HANA Cloud? I think that's independent of how do I manage the avalanche of bits and pieces coming in. I think those, again, it's part of the sort of never-ending, job description that comes with this title. I don't call it a job title; I call it persona. But I think that so I'm not sure the enterprise architect, has pushed back at you a little bit, should have governance authority. I think the enterprise architect has to be the one sitting in between the different governing authorities, IT and business, and helping them make the proper decision, the one that makes it best sense for the truth. It's a consensus building. It's a storytelling job. And without, so I just want to drive that immediacy back. We've got a genuine problem in the SAP ecosystem of thousands and thousands and thousands of customers who have not pulled the trigger on S4 and aren't looking to do it. That's the most immediate problem of the enterprise architect, I think, today. And we should maybe focus a little more on that.
Yeah, I want to get to that. We have an audience question, so I want to get to that because you're ready. Let's get in.
Yeah, that is not just a small hand raise. That was I am ready to say something.
Yeah, let's do this.
Uh-oh.
As you are looking at getting enterprise architects, most of the time those are thought to be in the ET space, IT space. You had just said, hey, you have to be the one in between the business and IT. How do you position yourself so that you can get the respect from both the business and IT to be that connector? How do you position and get leadership from both sides to agree this is positioning? Because unfortunately, a lot of times business sees it as, oh, they're ET, they're always going to be ET. How do you bridge that gap?
You were the bringer of the no.
That's
right?
the crux of the
I've been like custody for 30 years. So
You've asked
the same systems for 30 years. I've seen the whole evolution. And some of the people definitely have, on both sides will appreciate it. But some of the newer people are like, well, who's she to tell me she's an IT? She's an ET. Why should she be telling me what tools to be using? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, honestly, I think we've hit the essential problem. And unfortunately, I'm going to punt it in a way because insofar as you can't, as the enterprise architect, make your company do that. You have to have executive sponsorship. This is a leadership position change, I think, and I'm really hoping that, next Tech Connect, we're going to bring some line of business people here and get them in the room and start doing this mind meld that must happen in order for this to work. Because absolutely, you're 100% right. You can't force your way in the door. Now, there are ways in which you as an IT person can literally ingratiate's the wrong word, but maybe have common cause with your business leadership and learn to speak their language and do that kind of work yourself. But I really think this is going to have to come from the top. And that's unfortunately a big barrier.
I think that one of the inherent dangers that I think happens is we talk about IT and then we talk about line of business. And it's a way to describe something. But the challenge I see with that description, and this is something that I kind of heard from Patrick Deneen yesterday in the keynote, coming at this from an NBC Universal perspective. It's not about you versus me. It's about us and we. And somehow we have to stop creating this middle line down the sand that says this is technology, this is business. I think we've been learning pretty quickly that they're melded together. So the first answer that I would give you is I think it has to come down to something that we in IT have to do a better job at, which is relationship building and trust building, and helping the business leaders understand the broader implications of just buy whatever you want at the time. And I think sometimes as an enterprise architect, we might win some of those arguments and sometimes we might not. And I don't know where you draw that line about when that's okay and when it isn't. But I think if we try to act like put such a governance structure in place that basically locks everything down, it'll happen anyway, right? I think that idea that that technology can only be accessed through IT is long gone. So the question is, how do we make it realistic?
I want to answer that question. I don't know if this ties in, because I do want to answer that, but if this ties in, you could do that first. I agree with what these folks have said. I think one of the big things is that when you have genuine executive sponsorship, part of that is the executives articulating where they're going as a business, how they want to compete, and how technology is integral to that, and how your role in particular is crucial to that. So that's obviously the ideal situation if you have that kind of air cover to begin that. You don't always have it. And one of the things we talked about earlier today was how, because SAP never really fully developed that process expert skill that's supposed to interface with enterprise architects, it becomes the onus on you to take up more of that. So part of that becomes the skills transition around developing more of the process expert skills. I think part of it could actually be more of a consultative role that you take upon yourself and actually interview business leaders and get a better sense of their priorities and try to draw into listening mode yourself, like what they care about, and then begin to sort of articulate how it is you can make a difference for them. Because sometimes they don't realize how what you're working on is actually furthering their agendas. But this is not a question that we're going to easily be able to answer during this session, because it's really the crux, I think, of this entire show. So
yeah, I just have a comment. I've been doing enterprise architecture for quite a long time. I mean, more than 10 years. And what you guys are talking about is an industry problem, right? Right now, if you go to work for a company, that company might have a completely DNA. I talked to a friend of mine that's looking for an enterprise architect, and he told me they need to be experts in Java stack, they need to know Python, they need to do all these things because that's what enterprise architects does.
So like a super developer?
there's a confusion in the market about what an enterprise architect
You're
is
100% right.
and is not, right? That's number one. That's problem number one. Problem number two is we need to be storytellers, exactly what you say. We need to be able to speak the language of the business. We need to be able to translate that language of the business into business capabilities, how we impact the processes, and what technologies then impact that, right? So, yes, we cannot be the gate all be all for technology, but we need to be part of bringing the new technology in to assure that it ties with our architecture that we're putting in place. Otherwise, we're missing the ball. I had the opportunity to work for a company where I sat with the executive where they were building the business strategy. And I was able to build my business roadmaps completely tie and align to the business strategy and the vision. Where I am right now, I don't have the opportunity to do that with the executives. But what I'm doing is I'm sitting with the VPs of the areas and trying to win them and let them see what is the value that we bring to their organization when we work with them, with their processes, with their capabilities, and with the strategy. And the way I do that is by example and by storytelling.
So back to this notion of relationship building and building trust through relationships, which I think is the essence of everything that this always comes down to. I think there's another piece that makes this and puts the stakes even higher, and that's going to be AI, right? To the extent that in order to have a reliable AI, and I know we said we weren't going to talk about AI, and I said that I had too much AI, but when I think about AI, the only way that these tools are ultimately going to deliver business value is that they can capture as much of the enterprise data model as possible. To the extent that large chunks of data are dropped out because we can't get to them through an AI tool and it can't index it, it can't look at it, it can't drop it into its model, there's no way that data is going to be represented. So that by default, what the AI model brings back is missing big chunks of data. So to the extent that the enterprise data model is not cohesive, it's going to deprecate AI. And I think that's going to come back at some point and be a real issue, which maybe for the enterprise architect is maybe the silver lining to all of this, is that we can start to say, if we don't take enterprise architecture seriously, all these things that you think are going to save lots of time and elevate our game are going to fail miserably.
So Josh, I want to throw a couple logs on the fire and then I want you to riff on all of it. So just following up quickly on your point around enterprise architect definitions, I think what matters most, because we could spend a couple hours debating what the skill set really is, what matters most is how it looks like in your company and how your company agrees to define it and how you fulfill that definition. And I think in terms of things like different programming skills or whatever tools, like that comes down to really just understanding this is what our organization needs and taking a center of excellence mindset as opposed to like outsourcing this capability or hiring expensive consultants. Because I think ultimately it's about skill building a team rather than trying to chase a rock star persona. But in terms of AI, and this is where I want you to riff on, Josh, I've heard and read in the last week, not here, that AI was going to render enterprise architects obsolete in two different ways. One is that it will empower business owners to manage their own landscapes, which is crap. And second, that it will hyper automate all internal software management functions, and so the architect won't be needed. That's also crap. And also that cloud migrations will get rid of the enterprise architect because now we'll all be hyperscaler management and you can simply went around being an influencer. That's also crap. Okay. So what do you think?
We're the influencers. We don't need more influencers.
Anyway, we can have a longer conversation about why I believe those three things are crap, but I just want to put that out there. Josh, care to riff on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna bring that into my long rant here. No, it's gonna be a short rant. But I think I want to give just a historical perspective on why we're in this mess. And the fundamental reason we are in this mess is that the thing that enterprise software companies do, the biggest mistake they do is they try to sell a product the way they build it. They build it in silos, they sell it in silos. Guess what happens on the customer side? They buy it in silos. So companies are siloed by definition, and therefore, when you get to this moment of realization that, hey, this silo is wrong, we need to actually think across silos, whether it's for our AI data purposes, whether it's for our digital transformation purposes, that there's no one who does that. There's no one who thinks that way except the rare the rare architect who gets to sit in the room and talk to all the lines of business people and put that together. But that is absolutely not the norm. It's not the norm because the companies are not structured that way, and they have been aided and abetted by their vendors who are also not structured that way. So when we turn around this ship, it's not even moving, it's dead in the water, and try to get it into a new direction. What we're doing is turning around 30 years of malfunction in the enterprise sales and acquisition product. So back to your original question, how do I do this? Well, you can't be down, down on, in steerage class trying to get this boat on the right direction. It has to start.
This is the second Titanic metaphor, right? Now I feel that the magnetic poles have switched back again, and that now the world feels normal.
But when I said, the NSA, it starts at the top with SAP, and they're not doing as good a job as they should because they just want to sell RISE contracts. But it also has to stop at the enterprise level.
Hey, don't forget about grow contracts. Come on, man. It's not just all right.
I just say, hey, just
say it was an
grow fire bombs.
Just can I get a revolution? I got to ask you something else, sir, because I think this is a really important point for listeners too, as well as people in this room, which is you don't have to be this incredibly put together organization with this incredible transformation plan in order to benefit from these kinds of discussions. And in fact, if anything, what I've seen so far at Tech Connect are organizations that are really challenged by these changes. And that was the value that I heard of people in these sessions in the last day or so that didn't have it all figured out by any means. And in fact, in some cases, I was blown away by some of the complexities, thinking oh, we have 50 SAP systems. We're trying to figure out how to get it down to 10 or whatever. And I'm sitting here in my mind thinking you need one global instance or whatever. And that's, of course, a ridiculous thing for an analyst to think, right? When someone's dealing with real world problems and trying to ship product, right? So that's, Josh, I think you sat in on sessions that were similar where just a great reality check that, man, we're in the middle of it and we need to get together as peers and within this user group and figure this out.
So maybe the real definition of the modern day enterprise architect is silo destroyer and relationship.
Silo buster. Yeah.
Silo buster.
Silo buster.
And relationship builder, because if no one else is doing that inside the enterprise, that's a great place for them to play. I would like to take a pause for a moment and just say that what's cool about this today in this session we're having is we're hearing real live feedback from the audience, which normally three of us are sitting on, you're on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast, and I'm in the central zone. And we're just talking to each other. And sometimes I feel we're our own self-perpetuating, declining echo chamber. And I love the fact that, you guys are asking these really poignant questions, which fuels me a lot. So with that said, thank you for that. And let's get some questions going.
Yeah.
So you said silo buster. I don't think that's achievable. It depends on how big the organization is. You guys talk about EA in practice, but depends on the organization. The shared function.
Yeah.
I was an EA at NBC Universal, and I could tell you it was 9 divisions. Everyone has their own CIO, IT department, over 3,000 applications. So it was a monolith. I mean, it was just huge as far as what you were doing. So basically, we influenced what we could influence. The rest was noise. So we just looked at how we could share basically value across all those 9 divisions. And I think that's part of what EA has to do is where can you influence the best, right? Depending on the organizational structure.
I think that's a very practical.
Pick your spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second is the silo buster. It's pretty much shadow IT, right? The business wants to run fast. The business knows IT already. The business has evolved, right? It's not business and IT anymore. The business knows IT, right? So how do you provide them value at that juncture so that they're not going to the vendor, say, all right, let's go implement this SaaS solution. I'll buy it, no problem. I got my own budget, no problem, right? And they could support it themselves. So how do you add value to that is the question. But gain trust.
100%. And my counter thought to what you're saying, which I think you're spot on, and I think this does revolve around the size and scope of an organization 100%. And what'll play at a $2 billion revenue organization, what plays at a $50 billion revenue organization are vastly different. And certainly, in my career, I spent 10 years at Ford Motor Company at its pinnacle. I mean, we had 5,000 IT people in one building. And, that's a monolithic IT structure. I'm going back a long time. But what I thought was really interesting is listening to Pat Deneen yesterday, who is part of NBC Universal, talk about his career trajectory going from being a CIO at Nielsen to being part of the finance organization and championing the notion of change management within that finance structure. And to me, I thought that was a unique way, and told me that at NBC Universal, you're thinking about this problem through different dimensions. And maybe that is a shadow, a great, source, a ray of light to see if we can't get to success in another way. I agree. And it should not be a line between business versus IT. I think that it loses it. At the end of the day, it has to be about business. And we just happen to be technology professionals working inside a business.
I just want to add quickly that silo busting, I've been looking for this silo busting function for a long time, because it's the place where you have to plant really important seeds for all kinds of transformation. Office of the CFO and frankly, supply chains turn out to be more and more the places where this thinking has to take place. At the end of every supply chain is a customer. That's a marriage that has to happen. At the end of every dollar sign is a CFO. Opposite direction. So I think there's some places where maybe an answer to the question is to look for allies within these organizations that have to have this cross silo busting mode, or they're going out of business. Anyway,
I do agree with the blurring of the lines, but there's also, I think, an increasing emphasis on IT in certain ways in terms of the sophistication of today's threat management landscape and how AI solutions in particular need to be vetted in all kinds of ways in terms of privacy protections and things like that. But it creates a different problem, which is it puts IT on the defensive, kind of being perceived more as like the slap on the wrist, as opposed to like more of a proactive business partner. And I think that proactive partnership discussion is what really engages me when I hear companies figuring out how to do that. But I think you're right that in a lot of organizations, and this is what we've been hearing the last couple of days, is that they're struggling with this and trying to figure it out. And they really want to hear from people like you on, what do I do next? Like, what's the thing that I can do to get a win this year, as opposed to like transforming and busting all my silos, even though I love busting silos. Okay, who else we got?
We are experimenting with something called business architect function formally. So what we are doing is we still have an enterprise architecture org and function, but these like enterprise architects are mostly focused on these large scale enterprise impacting initiatives, right? And then these business architects, most of us come from a solution architect background, but now we are more business facing than IT. We still work with IT, we still license with IT, but our role is to gain that trust with business, make sure they come to us for their new requirements, enhancements, whatever. And then we work closely with business, and then we take the case to engineering.
I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. That, architecture should be a discipline that is applied across the business. How an individual organization divvies it up, I think, is how they want to operate it. But I think that, that shows a lot of respect that the practice of really thinking through this proactively and trying to connect these dots doesn't necessarily only have to happen in IT. It can happen across. And if it is, it's probably a healthier outcome. And it's probably going to stick a little bit better.
Can I just ask, since you asked this question, what do you think has been the key to sort of building the trust in that relationship? And part of why I'm asking that is, I assume that some of those conversations aren't always easy, right? That there has to be pushback on certain things, certain compliance things that maybe business doesn't want, or business wants things that aren't realistic. Like, have you had to have some tough conversations, and how do you get to a trusting place?
I think one of the challenges is what one of the colleagues mentioned, that shadow IT, right? By the time they come to engineering or to enterprise architecture in the previous cases or some examples that we had, business already comes and says, this is the solution we picked. We looked at it in some CFO journal or somewhere, we are going with this great treasury solution, right? Or something. And then what IT does is we just implement it, right? That was what's happening in a couple of the cases. But now I think you have a better role to play when you are liaising directly with business, double clicking on their requirements before they make that decision on the solution.
Yeah, and I was going to make this point earlier, that I think that there are some software providers out there who relish the fact of not being part of an IT structure and actually being able to kind of come in through a business lens and say, we can sell around IT. I remember part of a day in my career when one of them showed up in my office as a CIO, and they were especially proud that the marketing organization had bought a really big piece of software. And they basically looked at me and said, and now you're going to integrate this. And I kind of chuckled and said, sure we are. And here's how this is not going to work. And you know, their view, and I don't think that helps the model, right? But we do certainly have some software vendors out there that believe that that's a fun way to do this. And if they win over the business, then who cares? IT will have to figure out how to manage it.
I want to do a little bit of rapid fire answers to these next questions. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Shifting gears. What do you guys think? Like shooting it very quick. Architecture review board, guardrails. What are your thoughts on that for the role of enterprise architecture?
Guardrails would be my first preference. I think architecture review board sounds slow and cumbersome and potentially open to a lot of conflict. So I would start with guardrails that everyone can buy into. That's my personal opinion.
Your thoughts?
I second that. I like guardrails a lot. Review board sounds like kick the can down the road.
I like figuring out how to embed the, so-called best practices into the day-to-day process and design. So guidelines works for me. We're going to go on to the next question. Sorry to be a little concise on that, but
no, I love this part of you. This is great.
So a little bit different on our side. We have business buy-in. They're excited to get away from some of the manual processes. They're excited about the new S4 technologies. Our struggle is, okay, well, you have SAP Rise, you have SAP Grow. You can stay on-premise. They don't want you to stay on-premise, but you can. Pulling the curtains back, it's really, how do we set up our future state for the next 20 years? ECC worked for so long. It was great. It was fantastic. S4, SAP wants you to go Rise. They want you to go Grow. We don't want to go Rise. We want to stay on-prem, but we want to utilize some of the cloud. We want to utilize some of the AI. How do you navigate that cross, and still set you up for the future?
So, you may want to check out some of our past podcasts. We've had some very fierce debates on SAP's innovation strategy and making that work for you. That's kind of a long question, and we can't probably satisfactorily answer that right now. Maybe we could talk a little bit after. But I think one of the biggest things is it's good to have a little bit of independence from SAP when you make your fundamental transformation decisions. And it's not that you're trying to make enemies out of SAP, but there's some fundamental decisions that need to get made first, in my opinion. And then you start to figure out how SAP fits into that picture and start negotiating that. And some things you don't even know that are available. So for example, like, doing Gen AI Hub stuff with BTP without having to go to Rise, for example, is something SAP doesn't talk about a lot, but some customers are doing. So I think that's part of it too. But I think a big thing internally is that collaboration with the business. And the more you can have whiteboard discussions with them and talk through all these things and share with them what you're learning from SAP and what your non-SAP options are. If you have that buy-in, then I would capitalize on and have like really organic discussions and really see if you can rally around some core decisions and concepts.
I just want to take a quick answer to that. Watch this space. We saw an inkling of this at Sapphire with Mohammed Alam's discussion about the blending of Grow and Rise. There are customers all over the world running hub and spoke hybrids implementations. I think SAP is coming around to making it easier for you to keep some of your infrastructure on premise and run some in the cloud. And I think that's going to be a breath of fresh air for all of us.
I think one of my roles as leading ASUG is to think about where community needs to be in the next 10 to 20 years. And when I think about that and I listen to everything that's going on, if you as a customer want to be in the middle to the front of the innovation curve, you have to unload customizations. You have to give software responsibility back to the vendor, which means you have to be thinking about this through a lens of, if I want to innovate, I have got to give that control back. So every line of code I write is a long-term debt to me that I have to maintain. And when I think it through that lens, I think the faster we consider, this is not the place to get into because we'll be here for the next 4 hours. But ideally, and there's a lot that's going to have to happen here, a public cloud driven architecture where you're telling SAP, I don't want to run this. That's what I pay you to do. And you need to run our basic business processes. I'm done because I can't innovate outside of that. Otherwise I'm stuck keeping the lights on, is where we have to be. And so I worry that if we continue to come at this from an on-prem environment, I wonder how that interrupts that. And I think there's probably models that work in between. But I really think that at the end of the day, we as customers have to say to SAP, you're supposed to run this code, not us, which is a 180-degree difference where we were the past 30 years. 180-degree difference.
I think the original enterprise architect question, you had a follow-up. Do you have a quick comment now that you've heard the rest of this discussion?
Well, yeah, it was kind of actually in reference to what he said, where it's like business feels like they are now part of IT and they should be coming back. And I think actually, Geoff, you kind of referenced it where you said, here, business is coming, I bought this product. Unfortunately, I've seen that more often than not, where at least recently, business comes in and says, here, I have a business problem, but here's the solution we want to have implemented. How do we work to try to bridge that gap where it's like, yes, but then we have to worry about governance. We have to worry about, audits. We have to worry about all the other considerations that business has no knowledge of and is not supposed to know about,
Yeah, I don't think it's a fun place to be where, everyone can get into the bar and have a great rip-roaring time, and drink way too much alcohol and sing the night away. And then we as IT get to be the cleaning crew that comes in at 4:00 in the morning and tries to put all the pieces back together again. I mean, that doesn't sound all that much fun, does it?
That was a wild night last night, wasn't it?
It was well. It's tough doing an 8 a.m. keynote when you go, oh my God. Anyway, so I think there's got to be a better world than that. And I honestly believe that if we continue this notion of short-term gain and we want the modern enterprise to adopt AI, I don't know how this works. I don't know how we can be an enterprise and we can run enterprises that want to take all the advantages of AI when the data models are so fragmented. There's no way to do it. And it's all locked up behind, custom databases, custom code, all this other stuff. It just isn't going to work. At some point, someone's going to have to wake up inside the organization and say, this is insanity. We are going to have to approach this from a different model. Otherwise, we're never going to get to this. Or we're going to live with AI models and LLMs that continually give really bad answers because a lot of data is missing.
And I would just add that I think a key component of responsible AI that's really underrated, although I harp on it all the time in my writing, is output accuracy. And output accuracy is directly tied to a lot of pretty complex concepts, including prompt engineering and RAG and foundation models and all kinds of smaller models, larger models, models that audit other models. I think the more you can get up to speed on that kind of stuff and have input in those discussions, it makes you valuable to your organization. And it also helps the organization understand what some of the pros and cons are so you make sure that you have proper human supervision in certain AI scenarios. Enterprise architects stepping into that, I think in some organizations is really going to be great. In other organizations, you won't be able to do that. But if you can, I think that's an important role you could play around the precision around the technology.
And you can be a silo buster when you do that.
And I think that, while we might not feel this today, AI is probably going to be the biggest gift that was ever given to the enterprise architect, and maybe along the way, the biggest nightmare. Because I think if that's going to be the impetus and the way that all this has to come together, because I don't know how else you build an enterprise data model.
So essentially AI forces a data conversation inside your organization, right? Because it's this long-awaited data fragmentation conversation is now suddenly urgent because this current iteration of AI that stems from deep learning requires massive data sets, but also customer-specific data. And you're in a position to play a role in this conversation. And so if I were you, I would embrace that and try to take that territory unless someone tries to tell you that you can't. So look, we have
the sands of the hourglass are
so we are
slowly dissipating.
We are under 2 minutes. So I'm going to have you guys wrap it, but I just wanted to make a comment that one of the things I really wanted to do that we didn't get to was more hearing from you guys in terms of what you've experienced so we could get that across the listeners. But what I would say is hearing from all of you today really captured, I think, what this event has been like. So I really want to thank you for your super articulate and important questions, which I realize we didn't completely answer because they're not the kind of questions you can totally answer. But these are the kinds of discussions that I think are worth getting on a plane for. So I hope you feel the same way. And if we didn't get your questions, sorry, limited time, but we'll be hanging out afterwards. Happy to talk further. Final thoughts from you guys.
I echo what you said. I think this is one of the best sessions I've participated in over the past couple of days. I learned a ton from these questions this morning, and I'm very grateful that we had this opportunity.
And I will echo that and say that, my biggest learning is we, the SAP ecosystem are still on a journey that is going to be, it's an endless journey, but it's one where I think we're starting to see some guide rails, some signposts that allow us to know how to get there. But oh my goodness, that idea that everyone's going to be on S/4HANA in 2027, that one's evaporating quickly and necessarily here at this show. And I think what we're going to see of some really interesting changes, I predict, at Sapphire annual conference, because it's got to change.
Is this where you drop your mic and walk out? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
That's a
John.
wrap. Thanks all.